Let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. Have you ever felt invisible to the very people who should love you the loudest? Not strangers. Not coworkers. Not neighbors. I mean your own family. The ones you've shown up for time and time again. The ones you've sacrificed your youth, your energy, your sleep, your money, your soul for. Imagine spending decades building a life, creating memories, and holding everyone else together, only to find out that when it was your moment, they just didn't show up. That's exactly what happened to me. But what I did next, what I chose to do in response, changed everything. And by the time the story is over, you'll understand exactly why I did what I did. And maybe, just maybe, you'll do the same. Now, I know you didn't click on this video just to hear another sad story. You want justice. You want that satisfying aha moment. You want to know how one quiet, overlooked woman flipped the script on a family that took her for granted and hit them where it hurt the most. The will. So stay with me, because every second you watch brings you closer to the kind of emotional revenge that's not just petty, it's poetic. I'm not here to beg for your attention. I'm here to earn it, one truth at a time. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll see your own family through a very different lens. I'm Evelyn Monroe, 69 years old, retired educator, 2 sons, 1 daughter, and until last year, I thought I had the American dream wrapped in a warm quilt of Sunday dinners, Christmas Eve traditions, and group family chats filled with emojis and passive-aggressive reminders about who's bringing the mashed potatoes. I thought we were tight. Imperfect, sure, but close. Until June 12th rolled around. My 45th wedding anniversary. The first one since my husband passed. I thought, no, I knew, my kids would make it special. A simple dinner. A visit. A call. Something. Anything. But they didn't even text me. You'd think that would be the end of the story. A sad, forgettable day and a long stretch of lonely ones. But that day became the beginning. The moment something snapped inside me. Something ancient. Something raw. Not anger, not yet. It was deeper than that. A rising tide of realization that maybe I hadn't just been forgotten. Maybe I'd been fading in their eyes for years. Like a photograph on a mantle that nobody dusts anymore. But what made this worse wasn't just the silence. It was what I saw instead. You know that feeling when you scroll through Facebook and your heart drops a little? That creeping envy that makes your throat tighten? That was me. Scrolling. My daughter, Erin, posting photos from Napa Valley with her husband, sipping wine, laughing with friends. Caption. Asterisk, so grateful for a weekend escape. Hashtag blessed. Asterisk, my oldest son, Mark, was at a baseball game with his boys. Selfie with stadium lights behind him. Asterisk, father-son bonding night. Asterisk, my youngest, Lucas? He was the worst of all. He posted a story of him in a rooftop bar downtown with some coworkers. Champagne. Cigars. Club music thumping. Not one of them had even remembered. Not even a lazy, one-word text. 45 years married. And now? Just 45 likes on someone else's celebration. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to help them with homework, patch up broken hearts, plan birthday parties. The chairs were empty now. Dust collected on the windowsill. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something. I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at me. Because I'd let it get this far. I had enabled their neglect with every unreciprocated favor, every dropped boundary, every time I said yes when I should have said, you know what? Figure it out yourself. People like to say, blood is thicker than water. But you know what else is thicker than water? Ink. And I was about to take a pen to something that would change their lives forever, my estate plan. You see, what they didn't know is that after my husband passed, I didn't just grieve. I reorganized. I sold the lake house we'd been holding on to. I refinanced the condo. I restructured my investments. I made smart moves. Quiet moves. The kind of moves a woman makes when she's done waiting for others to show up. I built an estate, 7 figures strong, spread across assets they had no clue existed. And up until that June 12th, every one of them was listed in my will. Now, not anymore. But before I get to the part that made my lawyer drop his coffee and made my kids' eyes go wide with disbelief, you need to know the backstory. Because this wasn't some impulsive, bitter decision. This wasn't a temper tantrum from a forgotten old lady.
No.
This was a calculated response from someone who had finally woken up. You're going to see exactly how each of my children, Mark, Aaron, and Lucas, made choice after choice that slowly pushed me to the edge. You're going to witness the little moments, the tiny slights, the growing distance masked by just being busy. And as you listen, ask yourself, if it were you, would you have done anything differently? But before I take you any further, I need you to do something. Not for me, for you. Think of the one person in your life who never misses your milestones. The one who remembers your wins and comforts your losses. The one who shows up even when it's inconvenient. Keep them in your heart as you watch the story unfold. Because by the time this video ends, you'll see why we have to protect those people and stop giving unlimited access to those who only show up when they need something. This isn't just a story about money. It's not even just about revenge. This is about legacy. About drawing a line in the sand and saying, enough. It's about reclaiming the power of self-worth after a lifetime of being put second. It's about making people realize that actions have consequences, even when those consequences don't come until the reading of a will. And just when you think you know what's coming, trust me, you don't. Because the twist? It's not who I cut out. It's who I included. Stick around. Because everything you thought you knew about loyalty, inheritance, and family is about to get rewritten. Asterisk and ink star. And let me tell you, the reaction at that final reading? It wasn't just shocking. It was poetic. It was during those months that I quietly reached out to old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. I reconnected with Linda Dawson, my college roommate, who now ran a nonprofit in Arizona. We'd lost touch after our kids were born, but when I heard her voice on the other end of the phone, something inside me exhaled. We talked for hours about grief, aging, family, and how you sometimes have to burn bridges just to light your way forward. Then there was Henry, my late husband's best friend, who had remained loyal to me long after the funeral food had gone cold. He came by every Sunday to help me fix things around the house, even when nothing really needed fixing. He brought bagels, stories, and a kind of gentleness I hadn't realized I missed. He never once forgot our anniversary. Not once. At first, I chalked the kids' distance up to life. Stress, work, the busyness of parenting, of being modern. But the more I pulled at the threads, the more it became clear that it wasn't just life getting in the way. It was choice. I began to notice patterns. Erin stopped visiting after I refused to co-sign on a second mortgage for her vacation home. She claimed it wasn't personal, just financial. But from that point on, her visits dried up like overcooked turkey. Mark used to bring the boys by every other weekend until his wife, Claire, suggested that maybe I needed more alone time. I found out later that she didn't like how I spoke my mind too much around the kids, particularly about screens at the dinner table. And Lucas, my baby, had started borrowing money in amounts too precise to be random, always just under the gift tax threshold, always promising to pay it back. He never did. I started to wonder, was this how all parents felt in old age? Or had I raised 3 adults who saw me not as a person, but as a resource? I replayed conversations in my mind, like the time Aaron joked that I was old-fashioned for still using a checkbook. Or when Mark told me, in front of his sons, that I should let go of the past already, when I mentioned their father's birthday. The most telling moment, though, was when Lucas called one afternoon, not to talk, but to ask if I'd be willing to sign over power of attorney, just in case something happened. He said it was for my safety. He said it was to protect my assets. But the moment he said it, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. And then, one day in October, I received a call from my attorney, Paul Greaves. He'd handled our estate planning for over 20 years. The last time we'd spoken had been routine. This time, his tone was different, hesitant, cautious. He asked if I was sure. I told him I was. He reminded me that removing my children as beneficiaries would raise eyebrows. I told him they'd never bothered to raise anything for me. Not a glass, not a toast, not a single kind word on the day that should have mattered most. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being clear. I was being done. What Paul didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had already decided to add someone else. Not a family member. Not a charity. Someone completely unexpected. And that decision would eventually unravel everything they thought they knew about me. In the months that followed, I started noticing odd things. An envelope that had clearly been opened and resealed. An Amazon package I never ordered sitting on my doorstep with Lucas's name on the receipt. And then there were the conversations, whispers at family dinners when they thought I couldn't hear. Aaron asking Mark if I seemed all there lately. Mark suggesting that maybe it's time to talk about assisted living. Lucas offering to take the lead on managing things going forward. I hadn't realized it until then, but they were circling, watching, waiting, not out of love, but out of calculation. My mind, my money, my home, it had all become a chessboard. And they were positioning their pieces. The real kicker came during Thanksgiving. We'd agreed to meet at Aaron's house. I brought a pie. I brought a smile. I brought every ounce of grace I could muster. But I wasn't 5 minutes through the door before I overheard something that made my heart race. Aaron was on the phone with someone. I couldn't tell who. But I heard her say, "She hasn't changed it yet." I checked her desk when I was over last. Then laughter. Then silence. That night, I excused myself early. No one protested. No one walked me to the car. No one asked if I got home safe. That was the night I knew I couldn't just revise my will. I had to protect it, hide it, and leave behind a trail they wouldn't see coming. Still, something about it didn't sit right. There were too many layers, too many unspoken alliances between them. Was this just greed? Or was there something deeper? Something they were hiding? I started wondering if there was more to my husband's passing than I had questioned at the time. It had all happened so fast. Too fast. And now, looking back, I began to question everything. The missing paperwork. The vague explanations about our joint investments. Had someone manipulated things even back then? Was the anniversary silence a culmination of years of slow, calculated erosion? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. I began digging. Quietly. Carefully. I called old accountants. Reviewed bank records. Checked security cameras I'd forgotten were still recording. And the more I looked, the more things didn't add up. Transactions I hadn't approved. Phone calls made in my name. A notarized document I had never seen before. I couldn't prove anything yet. But I was close. I could feel it in my bones. But just as I was getting close, something happened that changed everything. And no, this wasn't something I planned. This was something they did. And it was going to force me to reveal my next move much sooner than I wanted. Stick around. Because the next part? It's where it all begins to unravel. And someone, maybe more than one person, is about to lose everything they thought was already theirs. What happened next wasn't something I could have predicted, and it certainly wasn't something I was ready for. Just as I was beginning to connect the dots, just when the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, the most important document I had vanished, my original estate plan. The updated will, the one I'd locked away in the old filing cabinet in the guest bedroom closet, was gone. At first, I assumed I had simply misplaced it. I scolded myself for not making a copy sooner, though I distinctly remembered slipping it into the beige accordion folder between the deed to the house and a stack of my late husband's life insurance statements. I'd always been meticulous with paperwork, too meticulous if you ask my kids, but that folder wasn't where I left it. Instead, in its place was a single page with my handwriting from years ago, an old grocery list I had once scribbled on the back of a church bulletin. Someone had gone through my things. Someone had been in that room while I was out. I didn't say anything immediately. Not to the kids, not to Paul, not even to Henry. I needed time to think. But the realization hit me hard and fast. I was no longer operating on just emotional betrayal. This was a violation. A break in trust so personal, so chilling. It made me question everything. I changed the locks. I added cameras. I even started sleeping with the door to my bedroom locked, something I hadn't done in years. And I began to suspect that this wasn't just about money anymore. Someone was actively trying to erase what I'd done. To make sure no one ever found out the truth behind my decisions.
But why? Why now?
And who would go to these lengths? The answer came quicker than I expected, but not in the form I thought it would. One afternoon, just as I returned home from picking up a prescription, I found a note taped to my front door. No name. No envelope. Just a folded sheet of yellow legal paper, scrawled with 5 words in thick black ink. Asterisk, stop digging, or lose everything. Asterisk, my hands trembled as I read it again and again. It didn't feel like an empty threat. It felt personal. And it told me one thing. Someone was watching me, and they knew I was getting close to something I wasn't supposed to see. I debated calling the police.
But what would I say?
That my own children might be behind this? That someone had broken into my filing cabinet and stolen my legal will? That a threatening note had appeared out of nowhere without a fingerprint, witness, or lead? No, I couldn't go to the authorities.
Not yet.
Not without more. And truthfully, a part of me still didn't want to believe that my children could sink this low. I wanted to believe that maybe someone else was involved, someone on the outside. But the deeper I went, the harder it was to lie to myself. Especially after the incident at the bank. See, after the missing will and the note, I thought it would be smart to move some of my liquid assets, just to protect myself, maybe even reroute the funds to a secondary account. I scheduled a meeting with my banker, the same man who'd handled our finances for years. But when I arrived, he was already waiting with a file open on his desk and a tight look on his face. Before I could say a word, he said, "Mrs. Monroe, I need to confirm something with you." Then he turned the file toward me, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There, neatly printed and notarized, was a transfer form I had supposedly signed 2 weeks prior. A full transfer of one of my trust accounts to an LLC I'd never even heard of. But the signature? It was mine. At least it looked like mine. My hands started to sweat. I knew I hadn't signed that paper. I knew I hadn't authorized anything of the sort. But the banker looked confused, concerned. He pointed out that the notary was official. The timestamp checked out. And the only possible conclusion was chilling. Someone had forged it. And they were getting better at covering their tracks. That's when I started to think of Henry. Sweet, reliable Henry. He'd been there for me more than anyone since my husband's passing. But recently, he'd started asking more questions. Little things. Casual things. Things that didn't seem important until I thought about them later. Like, have you made any changes to your will since Michael passed? Or, are you keeping everything in the house or moving assets into storage? At the time, I thought he was just being thoughtful. Now I wasn't so sure. And there was something else. A memory I hadn't thought about in years. Michael and Henry had once started a small investment together, long before any of us had children. Something to do with property and land shares in Colorado. It didn't amount to much, or so I thought, but Michael had quietly pulled out of the deal years before his death. Said there'd been tension, disagreements. He never said more. But now I began to wonder if that old rift had somehow resurfaced. If Henry had his own reasons for getting close again. If he was playing a longer game than I realized. And then there was Aaron. It's funny how a single moment can cast a shadow over every memory that came before it. That shadow came during an early morning phone call when I tried, foolishly, to confront her. I asked her plainly if she had been in my house the week prior. There was a long pause. Too long. Then a fake laugh. "Mom, are you feeling okay? You've been acting really forgetful lately." And just like that, the seed was planted. A subtle manipulation, hidden under the mask of concern. Gaslighting, plain and simple. And it wasn't the first time. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more I realized Aaron had been trying to cast doubt on my memory for months. Slipping in comments about confusion or misplaced things. Always in front of others. Always quietly undermining my credibility. I used to think she was just being protective. Now I wondered if she was building a case against me. Setting the stage for the day they could all argue I was no longer of sound mind. It was a terrifying thought. Because if they could convince a judge I wasn't competent, everything I had done, all the revisions, all the new beneficiaries, all the protections I'd put in place, could be overturned,
Erased.
and they'd walk away with everything, not because they loved me, but because they expected it. But here's the twist, the one no one saw coming. While I was chasing after stolen documents and threatening notes, while I was questioning the people closest to me and hiding security cameras and bookshelves, I stumbled upon something that changed the game entirely. A letter, sealed, postmarked from 3 years ago, hidden behind an old painting in the attic that I had gone up to dust off for a charity auction. The letter was addressed to me, in Michael's handwriting. I hadn't seen it before. I hadn't even known it existed. But it was real. And inside that envelope was a confession. And just as I started to read the first line, my phone buzzed violently on the attic floor. It was Paul, my lawyer. He had urgent news. Someone had filed for emergency conservatorship over me. And the name on the petition? Lucas. And that, my friends, is where everything truly begins to fall apart. I stood there in the attic, holding Michael's unopened letter in one hand and my phone in the other, trying to make sense of what Paul had just told me. Lucas had filed for emergency conservatorship. My youngest child, the one who used to climb into bed with me during thunderstorms, the one who called me Mama longer than the others, was now trying to legally strip away my independence. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I felt dizzy. The air in that attic suddenly felt too thick, like the insulation was pressing down on my lungs. I sat down on the old cedar chest and stared at the floor, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the storm beginning to rattle the windows outside. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip that attic apart, yell into the past, and ask Michael why he hadn't told me any of this sooner. But instead, I did what I always do when everything starts spinning. I read. Michael's handwriting was still neat, a little shaky at the edges, but unmistakably his. The letter was dated 3 weeks before he died. It began like a love note, memories of our younger years, a story about how he knew I was the one the first time he saw me fall asleep with a book on my face, but then the tone shifted. He wrote that he had uncovered something disturbing during the final months of his life. Something involving our accounts, our retirement funds, and the family business shares he thought he still owned. He never named anyone outright, but he referred to a betrayal from within, someone he trusted who had begun siphoning money through a shell company, funds that Michael assumed were going toward taxes or legal costs. But he discovered that the transfers were falsified and the signature authorizing them had been forged. He was afraid to confront the person outright, but he had planned to gather more evidence. He didn't say whether he succeeded. He didn't say who it was. But the fear in his words leapt off the page. If anything ever happens to me suddenly, he wrote, know that it wasn't just the cancer. The letter shook everything I thought I knew. For months, I had questioned whether my children had simply grown indifferent, selfish, too busy to care. But what if something darker had been brewing long before Michael passed? What if what I was seeing now wasn't a sudden shift, but the next phase in a long game I never knew I was a pawn in? And if someone was able to forge Michael's signature years ago, manipulate our finances without being caught, and now push for conservatorship over me, what else were they capable of? Still reeling from the letter, I tucked it deep into the folds of a hollowed-out book I kept in my office, a decoy I'd created after the filing cabinet incident, and went downstairs to call Paul back. Before I could, the doorbell rang. It was Linda, completely unannounced, hair drenched from the downpour, eyes wide with something between fear and disbelief. She had driven all the way from Arizona without telling me, and her hands trembled as she pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. It was nearly identical to the note I had received on my front door a week earlier. Asterisk, stop digging or lose everything. Asterisk, same handwriting. Same yellow paper. But this time, it wasn't taped to a door. It had been slid under her hotel room door. And the only people who knew she was staying in that room were the hotel staff, and me. That's when the reality of the situation cracked open even wider. It wasn't just me they were targeting now. It was anyone close to me. Linda had nothing to do with my finances. Nothing to do with my estate. But she had something more dangerous, knowledge. She was the one person I confided in, the one who knew I had changed the will, who I had included instead, and why. And now someone wanted to silence her too. We sat in my kitchen, wet hair dripping onto the old tile floor, trying to figure out who could have followed her. She hadn't told her children where she was going. She hadn't posted anything online. But someone had tracked her, which meant this went beyond greedy children. Someone else had eyes on us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Henry. He'd always been protective, generous. But he'd also been close with Michael. And if Michael had been suspicious of financial betrayal before he died, and if that betrayal had anything to do with the old Colorado land deal, maybe Henry wasn't the friend I thought he was. I remembered something odd from the funeral. He had stood in the back during the service, looking more uneasy than heartbroken. When I asked if he wanted to say a few words, he declined, said he wasn't in the right headspace. At the time I assumed it was grief. But now I wondered if it was guilt. As I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and questioning everything, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. No words, just a photo. A blurry image of Linda and me sitting at my kitchen table that afternoon. Taken from outside the window. My blood ran cold. They weren't just watching. They were close. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to manipulate me from a distance. They were already inside my life, recording every move, waiting for the moment I'd finally cross a line I couldn't return from. The next day, I met Paul at his office and showed him the letter from Michael, the forged banking documents, and the messages. His face turned pale. He agreed we needed to act quickly. But then he paused, flipping through the pages of the estate revisions I had signed. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "there's something here that doesn't match." He showed me one of the pages from the new will, the section that named my alternate beneficiaries, the portion outlining the irrevocable trust fund for charity. The formatting was off. The signature was correct, but the language? The clause about non-disclosure and transferability. That wasn't in the original draft. Someone had tampered with the legal documents. And it wasn't just a missing page this time, it was a full insertion. But only someone with access to my attorney's files could have made that change. Paul looked nervous. He admitted that one of his junior partners had recently taken on some of my casework. A young woman named Sherry, who'd been hired through a recommendation, one that came, ironically enough, from Lucas. Paul hadn't thought twice about it at the time. Said she was smart, detail-oriented, polished. But he had just noticed she hadn't shown up for work in 3 days. No explanation. No resignation. And now her office was empty. And that's when the final piece of the nightmarish puzzle slid into place. Because Sherry wasn't just anyone. She had once interned for the very company that handled Michael's early investment portfolios, the same firm that had been flagged by the IRS for questionable offshore transactions, the same one that went mysteriously bankrupt just months after Michael died. Now she was gone. And I had no idea what she had left behind, or taken with her. But I knew this. Whatever was coming next, I was already in it too deep to walk away. And the real danger? It hadn't even started yet. The first time I realized someone was actually following me, not just watching from a distance but physically tracking my movements, I was leaving the grocery store. It was a Tuesday morning, nothing unusual. I'd stopped to pick up eggs, coffee, and some fresh flowers to keep the kitchen from feeling as heavy as the rest of the house had lately. I was tired, running on nerves and half-slept nights, my mind still swirling from Paul's revelation about Sherry. The weather was gray and wet, the kind of gloomy morning that felt like the universe was quietly warning me to stay inside. But I didn't listen. I loaded the groceries into my car, and as I turned to push the cart back to the return stall, I noticed a black sedan across the parking lot. The windows were tinted, too dark for a car that standard. I could barely make out a shape behind the wheel, but the motor was running, and it hadn't been there when I pulled in. I told myself it was nothing. Just another car, another stranger, another coincidence in a world full of them. I pulled out slowly, but as I exited the lot and turned onto Valley Road, the sedan did too. Same direction. I switched lanes.
So did they.
I turned right earlier than I needed to. Still behind me. My hands tightened on the wheel as I took a hard left into the old post office parking lot, a place I rarely visited. The car cruised right past without slowing down. Relief flushed through me. fast and temporary. I waited 5 minutes, then pulled out and headed home. But as I approached my street, a different car, silver this time, an SUV with no plates, was parked 2 houses down from mine. Engine idling. Windows fogged up. My stomach sank again. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was a pattern. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind became a whisper I couldn't quite make out. I sat in my living room with the lights off, gripping the letter from Michael, trying to calm my racing mind. Was I imagining things? Was someone trying to gaslight me the same way Aaron had, subtly and over time, until even I questioned my own instincts? Or was I finally seeing the truth for what it was, and that truth was far more dangerous than I had prepared for? I went to check the front door again. Still locked. The back door, too. I double-checked the windows. Nothing had changed. But it didn't matter. The fear had already burrowed under my skin. 3 days later, Linda disappeared. I'd been calling her since she left my house, leaving voicemails, texting, nothing. At first, I figured she decided to drive back to Arizona early. Maybe she was spooked by the note. Maybe it was all just too much. But something didn't sit right. Linda wouldn't have just vanished. She would have called. She would have at least sent one of her classic 3-paragraph texts about needing time to process. I contacted the hotel. They confirmed she had checked out, but earlier than planned and without collecting her deposit. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her things were gone. Her credit cards had been frozen the day she left. When I finally got her daughter on the phone, she was in tears. "I thought she was with you," she said. "She said she needed to talk to you one more time." That was the moment everything inside me shifted from fear to full-blown dread. I knew, without a doubt, that Linda hadn't left by choice. And if they could make her disappear, they could do the same to me. Suddenly, every safe space felt compromised. The house I had lived in for 30 years became unfamiliar, hollowed out by suspicion. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Was Henry actually concerned about me, or just monitoring my reactions? Was Paul still on my side, or had he already been compromised by someone with more money, more power, more reach? I began to feel the walls closing in, not metaphorically, but viscerally. I avoided going out after dark. I stopped answering phone calls from unfamiliar numbers. I even pulled the curtains closed during the day. I tried to file a missing persons report, but the officer who took my call didn't seem to take it seriously. "Maybe she just needed to get away for a while," he said, as if the trail of missing belongings and frozen accounts meant nothing. I knew what this was. It was the same thing I had started to see everywhere now, a subtle disbelief in the urgency of an older woman's words. A polite brush-off that masked indifference. Or worse, complicity. The days dragged on, filled with silence and shadows. Until one afternoon, I received a manila envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name, typed in block letters, no stamp, as if someone had hand-delivered it into the box. I opened it slowly, unsure if I was about to find more threats, more warnings. But what I found instead made me sit down right there on the porch steps, the wind whipping around me like some invisible scream. Inside was a photo, grainy, printed on thin glossy paper, time-stamped from 2 years ago. It was Michael. But not just Michael. He was sitting across from a man I didn't recognize in what looked like a high-end restaurant. There was a stack of papers on the table. A contract. And tucked under Michael's hand was a check, blurred, but unmistakably signed. Not by him. By someone else. The photo was accompanied by a sticky note, barely legible, scrawled in pen. Asterisk, "You were never meant to see this." Asterisk. And that was it. No explanation. No name. No contact. Just another question in a house now filled with them. Because now I had to ask myself, what if Michael knew more than he let on? What if he had secrets too? And what if the betrayal that killed him wasn't just from someone outside the family? What if the worst truth of all was that the person I loved most had been hiding something from me all along? And what if the people I trusted weren't just after my estate, but the truth I was never supposed to uncover? The truth, when it finally cracked the surface, didn't come with drama or noise. It didn't arrive in a blaze of confrontation or a recorded confession. It came quietly, almost too quietly, through an old voicemail I didn't know I had. It had been buried deep in my phone, a forgotten audio file saved under a generic label that meant nothing at the time. I found it while scrolling through my backup files late one night, desperate for anything that might explain the disappearance of Linda, the forged documents, the photo of Michael with that mystery man. I don't even remember why I clicked it, some intuitive pull, maybe, or a last-ditch attempt to feel like I still had some control. But the moment I heard the voice, my entire world shifted. It was Michael. His voice was weaker than I remembered, like he was recovering from treatment, but unmistakably his. The message was short, recorded days before his death, and never meant to reach me through normal channels. He sounded afraid. Not panicked, but burdened. He said, "Evie, if something happens to me, you need to know, it wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. They told me you'd be safe if I stayed quiet. I didn't want this to reach you. But if it does, look for the second copy. The one we hid together years ago. Before the trust. Before the kids were even in high school. You'll remember where." The breath left my lungs. I played it again. And again. That memory, whatever it was still locked away inside me. Some hidden agreement from decades ago. Some document we must have sealed away in a moment we both thought would never matter. I sat back, trying to remember when we ever would have made a backup of something that important, long before estate planning, before wills and attorneys. And then it hit me like a thunderclap, the time capsule. 25 years ago, for our anniversary, Michael had insisted we bury a time capsule under the old maple tree in the backyard. At the time, it felt silly, romantic but pointless. He filled it with photos, a sealed letter to our future selves, and, if I remembered correctly, a copy of our first joint investment agreement. Just for laughs, he'd said. I hadn't thought about it in decades. We'd always joked that we'd dig it up on our 50th anniversary. That date never came. But maybe he had added something else. Something he never told me about. I didn't wait. I grabbed a flashlight, gloves, and a spade. The wind was cold, the ground wet, but I didn't care. I dug like my life depended on it, because it just might. And when the metal tin finally hit the shovel with a dull clang, I nearly wept from relief. I pulled it free, hands shaking, and opened it right there under the moonlight. There were old letters, a faded photo of us with the kids in matching 4th of July shirts, and then another envelope.
Sealed.
Labeled only with a date, July 19th, 2001, the day Michael signed over power of attorney for our early retirement investments. I opened it, hands trembling, and found not only the original document, but a handwritten note from Michael outlining everything he had uncovered. The shell companies. The offshore transfers.
And a name.
Not Lucas. Not Aaron. Not Mark.
Henry.
It didn't make sense at first. Henry had been Michael's best friend, practically his brother. But the note made it clear. Michael had discovered Henry had been using his role as silent partner in their early investment firm to reroute funds through offshore accounts, hiding money in dummy corporations with stolen identities. Michael had planned to confront him, but Henry had begged him to keep it quiet, offering to dissolve the partnership quietly to protect Evelyn and the family from fallout. What Michael didn't know was that Henry never stopped. He had just gotten better at hiding it. And the biggest betrayal? He wasn't acting alone. He was working with Aaron. I dropped the papers like they burned my skin. My knees buckled. Aaron. My daughter. My own blood. She had been helping Henry all along, using her access to my accounts, my house, even my health records, all under the guise of helping Mom organize things during the months after Michael's passing. It was why she'd planted those quiet doubts about my memory. Why she'd backed away after I refused to sign the house over to her. Why she always managed to show up when she needed something and disappear when I needed her. But there was more. Hidden behind the original documents was a photo, one I hadn't seen before. Aaron and Henry. Together. Not at a family event. Not at a funeral or holiday. But at a conference in London, arms around each other, dressed too intimately for two family friends. The timestamp showed it was taken a full year before Michael passed. Everything I thought I knew unraveled in that moment. Henry hadn't just betrayed Michael financially. He had taken something deeper. And Aaron had helped him do it. I sat there on the cold ground, covered in dirt, clutching 20-year-old secrets while the wind howled through the trees. I wasn't just being threatened for changing my estate plan. I was being punished for surviving long enough to discover the truth. Linda hadn't disappeared because she was close to me. She disappeared because she figured it out. And now, with this proof in my hands, I understood something else. They weren't just trying to steal from me. They were trying to erase me entirely. Legally. Emotionally. Maybe even physically. And worst of all, I was running out of time. Because someone knew I'd gone digging again. And by morning, they would know exactly what I'd found. It all came to a head on a rain-slick Sunday afternoon. The kind of day that feels heavy with consequence. I had barely slept since finding the time capsule and uncovering Michael's final truth. Every room in the house felt haunted, by memories, by betrayal, by the suffocating knowledge that my own daughter had orchestrated something far worse than neglect. I had spent the past 2 days scanning and copying everything: the forged bank documents, Michael's confession, the photo of Aaron and Henry in London, and the letter from the capsule. I uploaded files to cloud storage, backed them up on a flash drive, then mailed a sealed envelope to Paul's office marked to be opened only in case of emergency. I wasn't paranoid anymore. I was preparing for war. Because I knew it was coming. I just didn't know how or when. That afternoon, I invited them all to the house. Aaron, Henry, Lucas, even Mark, though I wasn't sure whether he was a pawn or a participant. I made it seem like a family reconciliation, one last attempt to set things right before revisiting the estate paperwork. Aaron responded too quickly, voice sweet like syrup, too careful. Henry didn't say much, just that he'd be there, like always. Lucas sounded nervous, which only confirmed to me that he was in over his head. They arrived one by one, all smiles, all charm, as if they hadn't been circling me like vultures for months. Aaron brought wine. Henry brought a file folder. Mark brought his usual distance, hovering like someone who knew he was in the middle of something he didn't understand. I led them to the living room, where the fireplace crackled softly and the rain tapped steadily against the windows. I let them settle in. Let them believe they were still in control. Then I brought out the evidence. First, the printed photo of Aaron and Henry. Their faces went pale in unison. No one spoke. I watched Aaron's fingers twitch slightly before she forced a smile. That was from a conference. Totally innocent, she said, voice tighter than before. Then I laid out Michael's note, in his own handwriting, naming Henry as the man who betrayed him and expressing fear that something would happen to me if the truth came out. Henry shifted in his seat. Mark leaned forward, eyes wide, as if only just beginning to realize how deep the rot went. Lucas looked between them, blinking fast, jaw clenched like he'd finally recognized that the game he was playing wasn't one he could win. And then came the final piece, a small audio recorder. I hit play. The room filled with Michael's voice, soft, weathered, but unmistakably deliberate. He spoke of his regret, of his knowledge that someone close had deceived him. He mentioned accounts, false signatures, and a partner who had once been like a brother to him. The last words rang out like thunder. Asterisk, if this message is being heard, I'm already gone. But Evelyn deserves the truth. And if Henry or Aaron ever try to deny it, remind them who signed the Cayman documents. Asterisk. The silence that followed was suffocating. Henry stood, suddenly too tall and too calm. This doesn't prove anything, he said, though his voice had lost its edge. That's a man dying of cancer. Rambling. None of this will hold in court. Aaron's eyes were darting now, calculating. She reached for the file folder she'd brought, opening it just enough to flash a document I hadn't expected, a medical power of attorney form. You've been unwell, Mom, she said slowly, coldly. I was going to wait until next week to file, but since we're having this family moment, maybe it's time we talk about how confused you've been lately. That was her last move. Her ace. But I was already ahead. I've seen the form, I replied calmly. And I've already submitted a forensic handwriting report confirming it was forged. Her lips parted, just slightly, before she snapped them shut again. Henry turned toward her sharply, face hardening. "You said it would be clean," he muttered under his breath, barely loud enough for the rest of us to hear. That was it. The crack. The unraveling. "You recorded that," I said, motioning to Lucas, who had been sitting silently, holding his phone awkwardly in his lap. He looked at me, eyes full of guilt and panic. I didn't know it would go this far," he whispered. "I thought it was just about getting the will changed back. I didn't know about the money. Or Linda. Or, you didn't know she's missing?" I asked. "Because she trusted me. Because she got too close." Lucas froze. And that's when everything spiraled. Henry lunged forward, not at me, but at Lucas. Mark shouted. The wine glass shattered. Someone screamed. I don't even remember who. In the chaos, Henry grabbed the flash drive I'd left on the table, shoved it into his coat pocket, and made for the door. But I was already steps ahead again. "It's a decoy," I called out calmly over the commotion. "The real files are with the FBI." A lie, but one he couldn't afford to test. He hesitated for just a second, long enough for Mark to grab his arm and pull him back. Erin stood frozen, her face crumbling. "You were supposed to leave it all to us," she hissed, her voice now trembling with emotion she couldn't hide. "You were going to die anyway. Why drag everything down with you?" And there it was. Not denial. Not justification. Entitlement. And that's when I realized something else. Something I hadn't seen before. It had never been about hatred or revenge. It was about inheritance. About control. About the way they had all grown up assuming that what Michael and I built was inevitably theirs. Like it was never really mine to begin with. That moment, as devastating as it was, gave me something I didn't expect. Clarity. They weren't monsters. They were products of greed, of pride, of unchecked ego passed down by a world that tells children they are owed their parents' legacy without earning an ounce of it. The storm outside grew louder, thunder crashing like punctuation on everything that had just happened. I didn't call the police, not yet. I let them leave, one by one, with the weight of what they'd done settling into the silence. I told them I needed time to consider my next steps. But they knew. The damage was done. The truth was out. And what happened next was mine to control. Only after the house was quiet again did I notice the envelope slipped under the door. Another manila envelope. But this time, the message was simple. Just 3 words, printed on a white index card in the center of the folder. "You missed one." I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding again. Not in fear, but in something else. Something more dangerous. Uncertainty. Because if this wasn't the end, then what had I just started? The days that followed were quiet, but not in the peaceful, healing way I had hoped for. It was the kind of quiet that came after a tornado had ripped through a town, where you could hear every creak of the wood, every sigh of the wind, because the noise of chaos had already passed, and now all that remained was the unsettling task of sorting through what was left behind. Erin didn't come back to the house, though I saw her name once on the caller ID before it disappeared forever. Lucas left a voicemail 2 days later, offering a clumsy apology wrapped in excuses and explanations that didn't carry the weight he thought they would. Mark sent flowers, but not a note, which said more than anything else could have. As for Henry, he vanished. No one heard from him. The car he'd driven was later found abandoned miles away near the state line. Authorities opened an investigation, but I didn't ask for updates. I didn't need to know where he'd gone. I only needed to know that he was no longer close enough to whisper lies into the ears of the people I once called family. Paul, ever the loyal guardian of my sanity through all of this, helped me resecure everything: documents, accounts, properties, and most importantly, the language of my estate plan. We rewrote it from the ground up, not out of fear, but out of clarity.
There were no loopholes this time.
No backdoors or questionable trustees. I removed every single person who had manipulated, coerced, or betrayed me. The new plan would be executed with transparency, compassion, and most of all on my terms. I gave generously to causes Michael and I believed in education, music, conservation, and I created a scholarship in his name for students who had lost a parent to cancer. I even set aside a quiet fund for Linda's daughter, who still hadn't found her mother and might never get the answers she deserved. It wasn't justice, but it was something. A ripple of good, pushed forward into the world in a way that couldn't be bought or stolen. I also found the strength to face the envelope that had been slipped under my door, the one that ended with a chilling message. You missed one. At first, I thought it meant I had overlooked another co-conspirator, another fake signature, another lie buried in a folder somewhere. But as the days passed and no new threats arrived, I began to realize it meant something else entirely. It wasn't about what I had missed on paper, it was about what I had missed inside myself. The piece of me that had been too willing to trust, too hesitant to confront, too afraid to believe that the people I raised could turn against me. I had missed the warning signs, ignored the gut feelings, buried the doubts beneath years of unconditional love. That message wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. And slowly, as the dust settled, I came to accept that the peace I was looking for wouldn't come from any courtroom decision or notarized statement. It would come from accepting the fracture, acknowledging that some stories don't end with reconciliation or a perfect family portrait, or even closure. Some stories end with survival, with rebuilding, with learning how to live with both the light and the shadows of what we've endured. I found that peace in the smallest places, in the scent of Michael's cologne still faintly lingering on his old sweater, in the way the sunrise filtered through the lace curtains each morning, in the smile of a child who received one of the scholarships. These weren't grand moments, but they were mine. One evening, as summer began to fold into fall, I sat on the porch with a warm mug in hand, watching the leaves begin to turn, and thought about the legacy I was leaving behind. Not the money, not the property, but the story, the truth, the testament of a woman who had been underestimated, manipulated, almost erased, and who chose to rise anyway. I wasn't the mother they expected. I wasn't the widow they pitied. I was someone who had fought for the right to be seen clearly, remembered honestly, and not passed down like some silent artifact for someone else to decide the value of. And yet, there's still one thing I can't explain. One thing that lingers in the corners of my mind when the world is too quiet. 2 weeks after everything had ended, I received a package in the mail. No return address. No name. Inside was a single item. The original flash drive. The one Henry took from the table that day. The real one, not the decoy. But I never got it back. I never saw it again. Until then, there was no note. No explanation. Just the flash drive, clean, unmarked, perfectly intact. I haven't opened it. Not because I'm afraid of what's on it, but because I already know what matters. And maybe, just maybe, the person who sent it back knew that too. So if you've made it this far, I want you to understand something. It was never just about the will, or the betrayal, or the money. It was about reclaiming the story others tried to write for me. It was about saying no to the expectations that love must come with a price tag, or that loyalty can be bought with inheritance. It was about realizing that sometimes family doesn't mean blood. It means truth, resilience, and the courage to start over. Because in the end, I didn't skip them from my estate plan out OSF revenge. I did it to protect my legacy from becoming their lie. And that was the most powerful gift I could leave behind. I even set aside a quiet fund for Linda's daughter, who still hadn't found her mother and might never get the answers she deserved. It wasn't justice, but it was something. A ripple of good, pushed forward into the world in a way that couldn't be bought or stolen. I also found the strength to face the envelope that had been slipped under my door, the one that ended with the chilling message. You missed one. At first, I thought it meant I had overlooked another co-conspirator, another fake signature, another lie buried in a folder somewhere. But as the days passed and no new threats arrived, I began to realize it meant something else entirely. It wasn't about what I had missed on paper, it was about what I had missed inside myself. The piece of me that had been too willing to trust, too hesitant to confront, too afraid to believe that the people I raised could turn against me. I had missed the warning signs, ignored the gut feelings, buried the doubts beneath years of unconditional love. That message wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. And slowly, as the dust settled, I came to accept that the peace I was looking for wouldn't come from any courtroom decision or notarized statement. It would come from accepting the fracture, acknowledging that some stories don't end with reconciliation or a perfect family portrait, or even closure. Some stories end with survival, with rebuilding, with learning how to live with both the light and the shadows of what we've endured. I found that peace in the smallest places, in the scent of Michael's cologne still faintly lingering on his old sweater, in the way the sunrise filtered through the lace curtains each morning, in the smile of a child who received one of the scholarships. These weren't grand moments, but they were mine. One evening, as summer began to fold into fall, I sat on the porch with a warm mug in hand, watching the leaves begin to turn, and thought about the legacy I was leaving behind. Not the money, not the property, but the story. The truth. The testament of a woman who had been underestimated, manipulated, almost erased, and who chose to rise anyway. I wasn't the mother they expected. I wasn't the widow they pitied. I was someone who had fought for the right to be seen clearly, remembered honestly, and not passed down like some silent artifact for someone else to decide the value of. And yet, there's still one thing I can't explain. One thing that lingers in the corners of my mind when the world is too quiet. 2 weeks after everything had ended, I received a package in the mail. No return address. No name. Inside was a single item, the original flash drive, the one Henry took from the table that day, the real one, not the decoy. But I never got it back. I never saw it again. Until then, there was no note, no explanation, just the flash drive, clean, unmarked, perfectly intact. I haven't opened it, not because I'm afraid of what's on it, but because I already know what matters. And maybe, just maybe, the person who sent it back knew that too. So if you've made it this far, I want you to understand something. It was never just about the will, or the betrayal, or the money. It was about reclaiming the story others tried to write for me. It was about saying no to the expectations that love must come with a price tag or that loyalty can be bought with inheritance. It was about realizing that sometimes family doesn't mean blood. It means truth, resilience, and the courage to start over. Because in the end, I didn't skip them for my estate plan out OSF revenge. I did it to protect my legacy from becoming their lie. And that was the most powerful gift I could leave behind.